Hey guys, thanks so much for joining me today on this episode of Danamo BIM. We are going to be talking about curtain wall panel families. Last episode in our random Revit with Danamo, we talked about the introduction of curtain walls, all parts and pieces that went with that assembly. Today, we're going to be talking about one of those pieces. We're in the sample file per usual. Let's get started. So you can see here, I have created a few new views, an elevation and a 3D view so that I can see this south courtyard, south wing wall a little bit better. So with that, if I select this wall, you can see exterior curtain wall is the type. If I come in here, made it imperial rather than metric. There's a fixed distance for both the vertical grid and the horizontal grid, and there is a curtain wall panel that is associated by type. So if I select the panel or the grid, you'll see it's grayed out and it's pinned. Okay. Now, I've found the best way to start to get to these parts and pieces is just to go down underneath of families in our project browser. And in curtain panels, we can see under system panel, there's glazed. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. And maybe I want to go ahead and have a frosted panel or something with a frit, something like that. So I'm going to call this frosted. And doing that, go into my type properties here, start to maybe create a new material. So of course it looks a little bit better here within my 3D view. Let's see if we have a frosted. No. So let's go ahead and create a material, rename, frosted. Maybe I'll open up my asset browser, search for a frosted glass, and I'll go ahead and associate that to the frosted panel. Appearance is now associated to the frosted panel. Under graphics, go ahead and leave that the way it is. All right, so I'll hit OK. Now I've created the frosted panel. I've associated a material. Already has a thickness and an offset, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we start to talk about actually the creation of the panel. And now, if I select that wall, I can either edit this wall type or duplicate it and create a new wall type and associate that frosted type. And when I do that, we should see a different type of glazing. The 3D view looks a little bit crazy there, maybe because it's on consistent colors. Maybe if I turn it on realistic, it might look a little bit better. And we can see that it is a frosted glass rather than the previous, which was the clear glass. Now to start a new family, we're going to go File, New, Family. And there's a few things that we need to understand when we start to create and build this curtain wall panel. We're going to use the imperial. That's why I switched this over to the imperial type and use the curtain wall panel. It's funny they call it curtain panels under the project browser, but curtain wall panel in the family templates. Like, come on. So if I go back, I'm going to switch it back to my project here for a second. You can see that the wall, and once again, just going to kind of use this south wall that I've been manipulating here as a type, right? You can see it has the frosted. The wall itself is offset, right? That kind of, remember the link below for the introduction to curtain walls, that dot dashed line that represents the actual curtain wall, the panel is offset from that. And that's really important. When we're thinking about these kind of parts and pieces, we really want to have the ability to offset them from one another, right? So you can see this panel has an offset. And if I change that offset to maybe, I don't know, let's go a little bit more dramatic, like 3 inches, then this panel should offset, right? And the mullion as well is pinned, but I can still come in here and I can change the thickness maybe, or even the offset. And I'll change the offset to 1/2 inch. Apply that. Right? So it can start to independently move these elements apart and offset from the wall itself. So when I'm creating the curtain wall panel, you can see it has the front and exterior here so that we can start to think about that offset and where to build the thickness. Do not create your thickness parameter from this. Create your offset parameter from this. I will say, this is not an introduction to family planning or family literacy within Revit by any means. Curtain walls are definitely a little bit of an advanced beast. Let me know if I should backtrack a bit and create some basic families that start to understand how we create offsets or really drive parametric values from reference planes. Super important. This plane, this front plane, we're going to treat as the same plane as this kind of location line, that dot dash line of the curtain wall. The very first thing within our family that we're going to do is go to create a reference plane, and have an offset. At this point, you can start to decide whether you want that offset to be to the face of your panel, to the center of your panel. Maybe you might need different offsets in your panel. We'll talk about that a little bit once we start to get into our geometry creation. I make the decision to make this my back of panel, so that essentially the thickness will grow from that side. The offset will be set from the back of that thickness, right? So select that dimension, create a label. I'm going to call this offset. Decide to make that an instance, maybe each one wants to be unique. Maybe you're going to have a bunch of panels that have a bunch of different offsets. That would be cool. Probably need to think about unique mullions or something like that with that. Now, one really important part about working with curtain wall panels, there is not typically a height or a width parameter. And the reason that is because the grids here, the reference planes, top and should be called bottom. I'm going to call it bottom. And so you can see those represent, if I come back into my 3D view here, the grids, right? I want this panel to grow based off of the dimensions between the horizontal and vertical grids, rather than dictating that height and width, either as instance or type parameters. So I am going to just create geometry from this left and right plane, and then in elevation, lock it to the top and bottom. I need one more reference plane for my thickness. I'm actually going to call this glazing thickness because we're actually going to have two different materials going on in here. And when I do that, you can see that if I change the dimension here, always flex, right? That was 3 feet, I'm to do 3 inches. You can see that it's going to flex from that offset. Change my offset. The thickness stays the same. Perfect, that's exactly what I want. It's actually quite easy. It's less work than a typical family. You just have to know these little tricks. So now I'm going to go ahead and create an extrusion between these reference planes. Lock, lock, lock. Lock. Finish. And then my exterior elevation. I need to think about the height of this from either the top or the bottom or both, right? Maybe it's gonna go span the whole like height. In that case, you probably just should have used the glazing or glazed system panel. This panel, on the other hand, is going to have a few different things going on with it. So I'm actually going to have a dimension here. All this. Bottom panel. Actually, height. Bottom panel. This glazed panel is going to actually be in the top portion. So as this dimension changes, glazing dimension changes, right? We could have this as a reporting parameter. Maybe we want to know what the glazing height is for scheduling purposes or what have you. We could create this as an instance reporting parameter so that you don't drive that. Once again, not a basic family literacy class here. But then it would essentially say in this piece here what that height is, right? Just reported. Because remember, we're not going to dictate the height. And if my height of that bottom panel changes, then we'll see a change to that top panel. Okay, it's just going to react with whatever's going on with it. Now that that's happened, I can go ahead and create my bottom panel, right? Down there, I want something solid, and maybe I want to be able to dictate that within the project. Now with this, I actually want to go ahead and be able to specify a different thickness and a different offset. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, create some additional parameters here. Maybe we should have put these on the same side. And I can start to associate this to that bottom panel. So let's just say offset, solid panel. Bottom thickness guy, we'll say thickness, solid panel. Well, we didn't do thickness earlier, so we'll just do solid thickness. Like glazing thickness before. So that's fine. All right, so now we can create our extrusion from here to here. Lock, 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 lock. Finish that. Look at that in my elevation. Lock those planes, even the bottom one. Right, and if I look at this in 3D, we can see, there we go. Start to adjust the thickness of the solid panel. Maybe I want that to be something a little bit more reasonable, like 6 inches. Something just has essentially an inset on the inside face, right? Maybe we'll give it a little bit more of a thickness. Now, the last thing that we want to do for typical family planning is assign some materials. In this case, material parameters. And okay, now if we go into our elevation, we start to move around these right and left lanes. I hate to nudge. I'm just going to use this guy. You could also use your dimensions. Move the top plane down. You can see it just follows those planes, okay? The bottom is locked to the reference plane, so that's fine. Now, what we can do is, of course, save this. And then, of course, load it into our project. Now, once again, the project that we're working with has some locked panels, right? I am going to unpin the first panel, right click, select panels along the horizontal grid. So that gives me all of those panels along that bottom grid line. Unpin them, switch them over to my new type. Now you have a panel that has glazed as well as the solid panel. We need to edit that a little bit, right? We can come in here and start to associate some materials. So we want to stick with the frosted glass with maybe an aluminum at the bottom. And we can start to also offset these guys, right? So maybe the offset for the glazing, which I probably should have named a little bit better, wants to be 2 inches. And the glazing offset for the solid panel just wants to be 1. So we can inset that inside the mullion there. Look in plan. See, there is our panel. Now remember, the main reason why we didn't do the width and height parameters for the curtain wall panel family, is because the grids in that family ultimately drive the height and width, right? So, for example, if we come in here and we change this spacing, maybe we just want to kind of flip it and go to a 4-foot width and like a 5'11" height. Let's just see. Any warnings related to some mullions or panels being deleted or what have you. That's okay. Should still ultimately work. See there, we'll just delete them. And there we go. Now, once again, you can see our height ultimately changed. We can still select this panel, unpin that. Select panels along horizontal grid, unpin them all. Ensure they're the type we need, right? The type we loaded in. And you can see there that the glazing height is a little bit different. Now maybe we want to change because we do have a parameter in there for that bottom height, of the bottom panel, right? Maybe we actually want it to be 4 foot height, so we only have a 2 foot height, right? We actually do have a reporting parameter of our glazing height, which you can see as an instance parameter. Hit OK. We should see the instance parameter update, and there we go. All of those panels have changed. So they have a 4 foot, let's just call privacy panel, if you will. So once again, within our family, we just created some extrusions with some offsets and thicknesses, maybe a height for one of the panels, but ultimately the height and the width are driven by the grids themselves. Learn some key points and tips when it comes to curtain wall panel families, such as building in the offsets, driving the height and the width from the grids, and so on. Let me know down in the comments what I should teach you next in terms of curtain walls and all of its assembly bits and pieces. Hope to see you next time.